Do you think that this is just a nothing burger, or could this be the end of the market?
The demand for Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs looks healthy.
There's some indications pointing to it being an extended cycle because if you have the M2 money supply and how that's going parabolic, and usually gold follows that, and Bitcoin usually follows gold, well, you can kind of put the two together. Here we go again with the tariff conversation. And it seems like the markets are panicking over this. Here to discuss this particular scenario and what it means for the rest of the crypto market is Sebastien of Aquanow, which is a financial institution platform. Friend of the channel, Sebastien, how are you doing today?
Doing great, man. It's good to see you. It's always nice to come on and have one of these fun combos with you. It seems like, yeah, whenever we do, the markets are bouncing around one way or another.
Yeah, it's definitely, we picked a good day to have this conversation. So I want to ask you just right off the bat, do you think that this is just a nothing burger, or could this be the end of the market? Because on one hand, I did see a lot of tweets going out there that October 6th will be the cycle top. And right now, that stands to be true. And now you've got this news coming in. So is this the beginning of the end for this cycle, or do you think this is just maybe some short-term profit taking?
Yeah, I think like the business cycle doesn't really show that it's like exhausted yet. Crypto might still be it's operating under its own like idiosyncrasies, but we'll see. Macro prognostications, while they're really fun to read and kick ideas around, they're kind of like famously tricky to try to call. I think um you know zooming out, while there's a lot of like weird stuff going on in the US and kind of global economies right now with a US shutdown. AI is causing some disruption. There's youth unemployment's pretty high, and so there's some weakness there for sure. On the other hand, you've got the major tech firms committed to just like huge capex spending. I think when markets are at all time highs, valuations are not are high for sure. Um, I think like when stuff like that happens, and the markets remember other bubbles of the past, you kind of get these knee jerk reactions. Where like the volatility kind of rears its head, and then convictions are tested. But I think a lot of the reasons why the equities in particular and the crypto have like come to this to where they are still in play. So you might get some headline noise here and there, but without a real kind of prolonged, like without like some crazy inflation shock or just an exhausted business cycle. I think seems like the momentum's intact.
It also seems like some people already knew about this. So before the market opened, there was this article that came out about 11 billion Bitcoin whale bets on BTC ETH correction with 900 million shorts. I mean, that's a very confident individual or entity, whatever you want to call it. So somebody already had a suspicion that this was going to happen.
That is interesting for sure. And the crypto markets are somewhat inefficient, and like while they're still quite inefficient, relative to the other traditional markets. And then they're growing in size, they're still kind of small. And I think like the general mood in amongst many traders in crypto is pretty tired and exhausted. And so something like this is doable. I saw that there was like 650 million of longs wiped out too. Levered longs wiped out this morning as well, or maybe that number's changed. But so I think this is kind of something we've seen before, like this kind of like people lever up, someone or like markets have a little flare up, and then here this happens. It's hard to say. I mean, I certainly don't know all of what's going on behind the scenes. So maybe people who are more plugged in than I am are able to place big bets like this when in anticipation of news, but it's hard to say.
Hard to say, but one thing's for sure. I think we all kind of had this idea that it's October, it's, everyone's going up from here. And the market showed us who's boss in a way, and goes to show you, you have to respect the markets and never assume that just because it's October or Rectember or whatever you want to call it. These are just funny ways of labeling certain months, but in general, doesn't necessarily means that history is going to repeat itself. But one thing that is happening, Sebastien, and this is again all media speculation, is that you've got these ETF inflows coming in. You know, IBIT is gaining momentum. Meanwhile, the prices are not necessarily reflective of that. And so there's this whole idea that market makers, they're, you know, shorting. For market makers, for those I don't know, they're in the business of making money. So whether the market goes up or down, I don't know if it necessarily means a lot to them.
I think the general idea that like the markets are being manipulated, by forces other than supply and demand are, you know, I don't put a lot of weight into any of that, in aggregate anyways. So I think, what you're seeing is as you said, right? Like really strong demand in the ETF market. I think I was looking just now and there's 1.36 million Bitcoin held by ETFs and 6.89 million held by ETFs. And those charts both look, quite bullish. So like, or like nicely trending upwards with strong momentum. So, like unequivocal, like, like clearly like those like there's buyers. Who's selling? I think it was like maybe whales of the past from what I've seen on other analytics platforms. And like I guess supply and demand is kind of what it comes down to. The markets, really are still pretty close to all-time highs. Different tokens maybe less so, but like, we're still sitting pretty healthily. And I think like these are still relatively like they're big assets, but like not huge. They are nascent, and so they're subject to volatility. But I mean the like just being like a handful of percents away from all-time highs and then kind of oscillating around or whatever else, like doesn't feel like the worst place to be. Uh, like I've never been one to try to call like market tops or bottoms or whatever else, but like it does kind of feel like a lot of the momentum pushers or the momentum forces behind crypto and gold and equities or whatever else like are still in place, and haven't necessarily waned. You might get some headline shocks here and there, or eventually things will momentum will run out. Of course, I'm not calling it like an end to cycles or whatever else, but it seems like things are doing okay. And so I think it's convenient and it makes for great news headlines. And I'm sure like it just gets like so many eyeballs when people talk about like market manipulation or all the evil market makers doing bad things out there or whatever else. Like I think at the end of the day, if people are more motivated to sell than buy, prices go down, and then the other thing happens, right? So earlier this week we had some down, some up, and then some down again today. I think that's probably maybe that indicates we're starting to maybe we're going to be like at a local top for a while. Things come back and go, and then regroup, and then could resume higher or lower depending if what the variables are at that particular time. But like unequivocally, like the demand for Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs is, looks healthy. And it doesn't look like it's going to like fall off a cliff tomorrow, but there could be some sort of exogenous shock that changes that. But those are pretty healthy sources of demand that look to be in place.
There's this other debate between whether or not we follow this 4-year cycle like we previously have, or could this be an extended cycle just because now we have institutions in place, we've got all of these ETF inflows. And look, there's some indications pointing to it being an extended cycle because if you have the M2 money supply and how that's going parabolic, and usually gold follows that, and Bitcoin usually follows gold, well, you can kind of put the two together and say, okay, most likely Bitcoin will continue to rise. But there's also the other side where people believe that no, it's a 4-year cycle. Most likely and the 4-year cycle is not just specifically for Bitcoin. It's also the S&P 500. If you look at previous history, you can see that there are patterns in it being a cyclical 4-year cycle. So I'm curious to hear from you. Do you think that there's some kind of indication to believe that this could be an extended cycle, and we don't necessarily need to pay attention to the halving event?
The halving cycle has kind of coincided with business cycles in the past as well. Like you could overlay halvings with like instances of monetary stimulus, and they line up pretty nicely. I think Bitcoin, 10 years ago may have been a little bit more idiosyncratic. And so the halving might have been more of a pronounced factor. And not only that, like the incremental change of reward was bigger than now too. So I feel like Bitcoin has moved more into the mainstream and is becoming more of kind of like a macro driven asset. So I would expect it to its price to fluctuate with the economic cycle, and forces, therein, interest rates, monetary stimulus, to your point, and then maybe just like general like apprehension towards risk as well. So that remains intact. I think business cycles can be influenced in their time by Federal Reserve policy, economic shocks, and so on. And so I think that could very much impact the cyclicality of the Bitcoin price. But again, I think you have kind of like there are the economy right now is a bit like odd. Like there's some slowdown in jobs. There's like productivity growth from AI. Rates are like kind of coming down in response to the job market, while inflation's still kind of high. There's a lot of uncertainty around like political alliances, what's happening on a day-to-day basis. The US government is currently shut down and all that kind of stuff. So like, there's reasons for people to be apprehensive with respect to risk assets. You know, the fact that
Which is ironic, Sebastian, not to interrupt you, sorry, but I just wanted to point out that if you look at previous shutdowns, the markets have actually done better for whatever reason.
yeah, and that kind of held true so far. Like earlier this week too, equities were doing pretty well. Gold, obviously, which tends to be kind of like an uncertainty type of purchase. It sounds like central banks are looking at it, being like, okay, well, what's going on with the U.S. The global political situation is a little bit risky. Maybe we'll buy some gold for our coffers, and then speculation, of course, on top of that, and everything else too. So like I think today's sell-off, of course, comes in the idea that like two of the global juggernauts are in disaccord, and that's meaningful, right? Like you'd expect risk assets to come off in something like that if China, like we saw earlier this year with like the general rhetoric around like increased tariffs, what's that's going to mean. So the market sells off, kind of recuperates, and then it's like, oh well, we might end up in like a aggressive trade war between the U.S. and China. Like, yeah, like I mean, like doesn't really make you want to rush out and buy equities necessarily. So I think we'll have to kind of wait and see how this goes. At the end of the day, at least in democracies, politicians need to get reelected. And so I think that kind of keeps things in check in terms of, and then like, markets have become such an important gauge of like a sentiment and whether or not politicians are doing a good job in many places. And so, that's kind of my personal belief when I look at things. I think like, okay, there might be some jostling here and there at the margin, but I think ultimately, people don't want to like tank economies.
Transitioning, Sebastian, away from just the overall macro situation, talk to me about like what's happening in Web3. What are you seeing on chain? You obviously put together a great report on a monthly basis for Aquanow, talking about the things that are happening on chain, whether it's gold, Bitcoin, Ethereum, but not just those major assets. You even talk about like Hyperliquid and some of the altcoins and what's happening on chain. So would love to kind of highlight some of the key things that you're seeing that you thought were interesting.
One of the charts, and I got this from Raoul Paul at Real Vision. I think it's a pretty cool idea, and it speaks kind of to what we were talking about earlier about like the influence of the business cycle in crypto, rather than the mechanical decrease of rewards emitted from the Bitcoin blockchain. And so here you have the ISM manufacturing PMI, which is kind of like a sentiment gauge of purchase managers, like will they be like buying more or less. And so you see that there's some cyclicality there with respect to like general economic activity. And then you have the Bitcoin dominance inverted. So that's the orange chart, and like when it goes down, that means Bitcoin dominance is going up. And so kind of interesting to see that, like, when the economic market goes down, like I guess it's what's leading here is hard to say. Maybe Bitcoin is like a forward looking, and so it's like it goes down, and then manufacturing or economic activity contracts, and then as the economic activity rebounds, the Bitcoin dominance goes down, and that's interesting to me because this is the year over year change in Bitcoin dominance as well. So it's like you know the rate of change, and so it's kind of interesting, right? Where it's like you might see, if you think that like economic activity is set to kind of like pick up on the back of like you know uh, a bit of a reset with the Trump tariffs, and then productivity gains from AI, in addition to a lot of like capex spending there. Then if that happens, then you might see the change in Bitcoin dominance, kind of like decrease, and so that would involve an alt season. So I like this chart a lot. Definitely didn't make like this is all Raoul and Real Vision's work. I recreated it with Bloomberg, but pretty and TradingView, but pretty interesting anyways to see what that looks like. So it kind of speaks to what we were talking about before, where it's like the economic cycles impact here, and so we'll see, right? I mean, if economic activity picks up, then maybe we'll get that alt season. There's so many tokens out there that I don't know. It'll be kind of tricky to have everything go up, but we'll see. It's interesting, and I think like an area where you might see like kind of like some outstanding price action could be like from on slide 10 in the DAT space. So like ETFs as a source of new demand, I think these DATs are pretty interesting. What remains to be seen is whether or not these treasuries will actually like put their tokens to work in DeFi, or which will be really interesting, I think, to as like as a driver of economic activity on chain. So we'll see, but pretty cool that you've got a substantial amount of ETH and even Solana now. These and these digital asset treasuries. Of course, there's like Hyperliquid coming. More of those kind of have been announced, and then there's some BNB there too. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of new source of demand, and then potentially even in on-chain activity. So like those are things that I'm keeping an eye on for sure.
So maybe with like the regulatory clarity, some of these DATs will be like staking their ETH perhaps or their Solana, and that could kind of create more of like a DeFi move for us.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a it's something to be seen anyways, but that would be pretty interesting if all of a sudden you start like getting these treasuries trying to like earn profits in DeFi with their treasury holdings. That would be a really cool kind of mixing of like on-chain activity with like GAAP or IFRS profits. Would be pretty cool. So we'll see if that comes to fruition, but certainly interesting to see more of these crypto assets represented in equity markets.
Certainly.
I think some of the other charts in the deck this month are kind of again around stable coins. So I think that's an interesting development. But there's lots of stuff happening there. Of course, it's like there's a ton of new stable coins coming to market all the time. Different people trying to play with or issue their own stable coins like Phantom and Cash and all this kind of stuff like that. So we'll see how it goes.
MetaMask too, right?
MetaMask is coming, yeah, for sure. But it'll be interesting to see, I think how this all plays out. Like financial services tend towards oligopoly, I think, by and large. So you may like it may be called one thing, but it'll probably, I think settlement will probably happen, oligopolistically. But we'll see. I think something that's interesting is, in the terms of like velocity, Circle, is has a larger presence on Solana, where there's a lot of like, kind of like higher frequency kind of and smaller ticket transactions. So Circle.
Is there a page, Sebastian, that we
Oh,
can,
sorry, yeah.
can look?
Chart 13. So this is Citigroup put this together. And so you can see like both of these are really healthy, like increasing supply and velocity and volume for Tether and Circle. Like Circle's like velocity is way higher than Tether, but Tether's worth way more, and that's because it has a lot more supply, and that's what makes money. So right now, the velocity doesn't make a ton of money. It's like the network effects I think that you build around that stuff. And so it'll be interesting to see. Like I think Tether's worth what I think it's like close to double Circle. It has a lot more supply. That's where the economic engine is, not necessarily a transaction volume. And so yeah, well, I think that is kind of like when I think about that a lot when I see all these new stable coins coming out. It's like we'll see how much like how that works. They can incentivize users to kind of coalesce around those tokens and try to like have some additional profitability there. But I think like the Tether versus Circle valuation kind of to me is what I kind of go back to, where it's like Tether's like maybe doesn't move around as much, but there's just a lot more of it. It makes a lot more money and it's worth more. So it's going to be tough to
Yeah.
unseed. In
Tether
addition
has
to
like
like you've got
what, 300 employees, but like in terms of revenue, like they're up there like in the world, I believe, in terms of like the ROI per employee. It's insane. Like that business model is absolutely insane.
Yes, for sure. No, it's super impressive, and I think the investments that they've made with respect to like stable and plasma and elsewhere around the world, like and elsewhere across the ecosystem, are really fascinating. And I think for example, like plasma free tether transfers on the chain, but like everything else you still have to pay for, and so they're kind of like saying like here, come transfer tether for free here, like kind of what I was saying, and then they're going to make money on the ecosystem that gets built around it. And so that, which would it kind of works with what I'm saying here in terms of like, just having a lot of velocity doesn't necessarily make for like the best economic model. Like in stablecoins, supply is what pays you so far, anyways. And then probably some of the biggest news this month, right, was in these like perpetual futures kind of like platform wars. Actually today I published a little bit of an essay about like Hyperliquid and how I think like just such a fascinating case study of what they've done with respect to incubating a project, launching that project to like launching a token associated with that project to the community, and then having a lot of like regular exchange functionality kind of endogenous to the project with respect to like HLP, the assistance fund, and other kind of mechanisms there. And they did that so they have this like nice perp dex spot dex kind of like functionality, and then they have the hyper EVM, which comes through and provides this really kind of like efficient DeFi market that can tap into the liquidity that's already on hype, and you see the whole kind of vision playing out. It's super fascinating. There's a book called The Cold Start Problem by Andrew Chen, and he reiterates in that book several times that like just because your business is like benefits from network effects, like those network effects are available to anyone. And so it was really interesting to see like Aster kind of like rebrand and come out with a huge bang in terms of volumes. Of course, like open interest is lower, so what's going on there? Like we'll leave that to time to kind of sort out. But if you go to slide 16, like the charts are crazy, right? Like Hyperliquid in and of itself is like a beast of a business, and then you see Aster come through with just these huge numbers. Like what like what's going on there? Again, I prefer not to just to speculate like that in the open. Let people do some digging around and reading. Like it's really are impressive numbers, and we'll have to see, right? Like Hyperliquid has done an exceptional job. There's really no reason to think that they're going to like fall off from their ability to continue to develop. I don't like they're they don't seem to they seem laser focused on execution. They're not like you know uh, a big clunky incumbent like you've kind of seen in the past where when this kind of stuff happens. But will be interesting to see, right? Like can Aster come through, with this perp dex kind of experience, build up a business, and then like also then kind of like have a some network effects. How that'll play with the BNB chain or whatever else is, I guess, also remains to be seen. But certainly very fascinating to keep an eye on. I don't know if you have any questions or wanted to touch on anything there, but
Yeah, I
really, I
do
think
actually. So my question is about Hyperliquid. I mean, do you think that they can really sustain that competitive edge just because, you see like Aster and to your point, who knows what drove that momentum, but you also have other competitors that are on the rise. You've got Fogo that's on the horizon, and also Solana. Solana is constantly making upgrades as well, and they're looking at this like, hold on a second, like we're the retail chain, and so they're going to be coming after Hyperliquid and making all the updates in order to make sure that from a technical perspective they can do as much as Hyperliquid, if not more. So it's a very stiff competition.
it for sure is. Lighter Networks is another one that kind of should be mentioned there. It sounds like they're a pretty beast team. So we'll see. You know, as I said, network effects are available to anyone, right? I think Hyperliquid kind of showed the way. And we'll see how they're able to compete now when other people are going to try to emulate their own playbook. But you know, it's just kind of hard to count them out. They do have this large platform. We saw what happened with their USDH kind of like auction and all the interest that was there. It sounds like a lot of those people still want to go and launch on the or in the ecosystem. So like I think they still have a bit of runway. Size matters. It's like someone could say, well, I missed the boat on Hyperliquid, so I'm going to go and build something cool and on BNB tapping into Aster. I just don't know exactly how well that's going to like play versus like the Hyperliquid, its builder codes, and the relative ease that they've kind of integrate like architected their system. Not to say other people can't do that, but I think they're doing okay. And if you go to the next slide, like they're still bringing in many new users, as and have like a really healthy kind of like regular like transacting users, and like the trend of active accounts is looks really healthy. I mean, like could it stop? Sure. Like DYDX had a huge had a massive like 80% market share in the perp space for a long time, and like that's draft effectively all been seeded almost to Hyperliquid. So it could happen. I think that part of the genius of what they've done though is, and we'll see how quickly this can change. But like there are a lot of new DeFi applications that have like launched on the Hyper EVM, more coming, and so if will they be able to execute the product to platform amidst this competition? I mean, again, like I've never met the founders there. They seem pretty dialed. They've executed incredibly well so far. So it's like you kind of got to like give them the credit where it's due, and kind of think that they'll be able to. I don't have any evidence to point towards where I could be like, I think they won't for the following reasons, but like it is like it will be difficult for them, and like the benefits that they have of like are kind of available to others as well, especially the fact that like the playbook is was kind of there. You know, that's also true of many other ecosystems, right? Like Solana was supposed to be famously like an ETH killer. Well, he's still hanging around. Solana's done well in its place, you know, and maybe over like many, you know, we'll see how that dynamic ends up playing out as well. But I think you know, there's good reason to think that you know, Hyperliquid still got a place there. I just don't know, like personally, I don't know how many perp dexes the world needs, or like how many venue trading venues or whatever else, right? Like that's kind of my own thing. I like to transact in assets, sure, but like I don't spend all day looking at screens.
I think it's now more about like how decentralized do you want to go without sacrificing the user experience, right? Because I think that's the thing that I see the up and comers try to tackle. Whether or not it makes sense to do that, that's a different question. But like I talked to a team that's building on Solana, and their whole thing is like, well, you know, we could do all these things, but we are fully decentralized. Everything's on chain, and this is why you want to do that. It's more secure, and you know, there's certain advantages to that. So that's the only difference that I can see now. Like, how many clients are they using in order to like settle these transactions? Just like really minor technical things.
Yeah, like you know, user experience. Like I think like Hyperliquid kind of built around that first, and then they have this kind of platform that's gonna like you know try to get launched there afterwards. And you know, there's certainly a big pie to be captivated, you know, in terms of like the liquidity that is there. So you know, we'll see. So far, the idea of you know of trying to capture platform has mattered. You know, capital is a little bit sticky, but it still flows around pretty easily. So, you know, I guess it remains to be seen. You know, and there's other projects out there competing for attention as well. So, you know, I think crypto still has a lot of like, you know, like blue ocean ahead of it in terms of like trying to bring more people on chain. And as a result, like there can be more than one platform that you know for a while anyways. But I do tend to think that you know you get like this general tendency towards kind of oligopoly, like we have in large internet companies today, large banks, and so on and so forth. So I would think that that kind of like plays out eventually, but you know, we'll see. In the short term, there's still a lot of like new people to be brought into the ecosystem that you know could allow for you know, some fragmentation. But but we'll see, right? Like the funny thing is like if someone builds a really cool open source project on Hyper EVM, and like could someone just build that somewhere else? Yeah, maybe. That's kind of the beauty of it all, right? And so you really do compete on user experience, and then also liquidity, right? Which Hyperliquid seems to have an edge on right now.
Yeah. Any other charts that really stick out to you, Sebastian?
Well, just I guess kind of like along these lines, obviously like BNB's, you know, sitting near all-time highs, and you know it's benefiting. So the next chart over, yeah, it's benefiting quite a lot from like this new Aster thing. You know, how much of that is like you know deliberate as you know centralized exchanges and their chains you know want to try to like you know compete with the you know the up and comers like Hyperliquid. You know, hard to say you know what's going on there, but like the numbers are that like you know number of BNB chain active users like new and you know is very impressive. So that you know something seems to be happening there, and then that plays right into you know the BNB burning, which you know they $1.2 billion was supposed to be burned, I guess, last quarter. There's more, like another billion probably coming this quarter, maybe more. So pretty impressive to see those kind of numbers and new users coming along. And so it's you know it's kind of hard to say like this is what's going to happen as a result of you know these changes, but certainly big forces at play in the marketplace, and really fascinating to see how that translates in the numbers and charts.
And now you have like even like a mini meme coin season that's happening
Yeah,
on BNB. I don't know if that necessarily lasts because I want to say CZ said a few things started pumping, and then he kind of took his words back. And so I don't know if that's necessarily going to last, but yeah, a lot of activity happening within the BNB ecosystem for sure.
yeah, for sure. Like, and I guess trading memes can be fun, maybe, but like, it just seems so. I don't know. It just like it feels like a very like weird way to pass one's time trying to like get ahead of like what thing might run for how long and all that kind of stuff. It's like, there's really interesting compounding businesses out there and really cool business models that are being tested, and I think that's like really fascinating. I don't think like meme coins as a phenomenon any stretch, but like, yeah, just I don't know. It would be still certainly I'm too old. Maybe that's the case. Maybe Mikhail. Just like the idea of trying to get ahead of those things and play that game is
I
not for
want to
me.
come back to another project though, Sebastien. I want to come
Hmm.
back to you mentioned Plasma earlier in the conversation. So I was just pulling up their chart because I was curious to know how they're doing. So this is on a coin market cap. So since the launch, it looks like they're trading about 0.65, and so their ticker is XPL. So essentially, Plasma is a XRP competitor, right? In terms of what they're wanting to tackle and kind of be the Swift alternative, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting chain. You know, trying to build like economic ecosystem around Tether, which is really fascinating. Like, I think the project itself is interesting. Where it settles in terms of valuation or whatever else is really for supply and demand to kind of dictate. I think you've kind of seen a similar reaction to many new blockchain launches that happen. Chain, Linea. We'll see what happens with monads. A lot of the ones that kind of came out before in the movement space. It's tough. Like, and I think before when there was like more concentration, maybe some projects saw like, or like some blockchains saw kind of like different had different experiences, but now it's like you come out, it's like, okay, cool. There's a lot of capital flows that happen from like initial TBL agreements. They get rolled off, incentives there get kind of recycled, so on and so forth. And it's a tricky kind of, it's hard. Like these projects, it's tough for them to try to like captivate an audience. I think
Yep.
Plasma has a lot of like old like blue chip projects that launched on it right away. There's a lot of TVL there. How much of that sticks around post incentives? Hard to say. Typically, you've seen like pretty large outflows there. I think Linea, you've got it pulled up there. The token hasn't done super well. They had a number of like really, if you on my chart pack, it's on 20. So they had a pretty decent amount of TBL. Some of that came off. Active users, it's like the daily active users. They came in, maybe for their claim, and then they went away. It's like I think that there is a case to be made for like having a lot like a lot of block space out there. It might be the situation kind of like with like bandwidth in the past where like things were overbuilt. The we have there's a lot of cool experimentation happening right now where killer wraps will be launched, and where what captures people's attention we'll see. It'll just be like like Linea, for example, supposed to be like in conversations with Swift. So like if like Swift ends
I
up
was going to
like
mention that.
redeploying on Linea, then like holy crap, you could expect that to be like pretty big for activity on that chain. That would probably be pretty bullish for the token. I think I don't know a ton about the tokenomics there, but like that's huge. If Plasma is successfully able to build like an ecosystem around Tether, like obviously a juggernaut there. We see like Tether, USDT, like having a lot of application in areas where banking rails are tricky. Currency, national currencies are maybe not as solid as the USD, stuff like that. It's there's lots of promise that remains, but there's lots of block space out there too, and lots of projects that are trying to compete. So I think you launch, there's some fervor, and then it's like, okay, you kind of have to kind of build. You see some projects that will just, or some blockchains kind of fall out of relevance altogether, whereas others kind of hang on. They have their community, and then they kind of go from there. So we'll see. I think it's tough days for plasma token holders if they bought like on day one, or like thought they were gonna ride some heavy momentum. Same with Linea. Bear Chain it's had a similar experience. But at the end of the day, it's like there's new projects, there's interesting things happening on all these different ecosystems, and so we'll see how time plays out. It's competitive out there.
It's competitive. The narratives change, seems like on a weekly basis. I mean, who knows? Maybe next time we'll be on here, we'll be talking about prediction markets. That seems to be another one that is on the rise in terms of attention, especially with this rumor that Polymarket could be launching a token. And of course, you've got Kalshi that's really big in North America. So that's another vertical that I think could be heating up here moving forward.
Definitely.
But only time will tell. And I know one thing's for sure, Sebastien, is if there's on-chain data on it, you will provide it to us. So certainly appreciate all these reports that you put together and coming on and sharing your take both on the TradFi side, which is your background, but also on the on-chain side. Really appreciate you. And everybody can check out, the link will be in the description. Check out the newsletter, subscribe to that. Sebastien puts it out every month. It's amazing. And follow Sebastien on X and subscribe to the channel, like the video. And Sebastien, yeah, this was a real pleasure. Thanks again.
Thank you. There's so much stuff happening all the time, as you say. So it's nice to be able to like sit down once a month and try to like go through the data, put together like a bit of a story, and kind of refine my own thought process. And then to talk with you about it and share with the community is it's a privilege. So thank you.
If you're a founder or operator in Web3 and want to connect with others like you, head on over to networkspotlight.io and apply to become a member. See you on the inside.